Welcome, everyone, to our special edition of our lunchtime lecture series. And we have the privilege of having Herb Stratford here to talk to us about his documentary, Gustav Stickley, American Craftsman. But before I hand it over to him, just a quick reminder that we are doing some events virtually right now, so you can check those out on our website. And under the About the Mansion line, you can actually see there is added now a Gustav Stickley tab. So you can go quickly to see the documentary and watch that if you have not done so already. So now streaming, of course, that documentary. We also have coming up in April for our lunchtime lecture. Amazing volunteer Adrian Rose is going to be doing a virtual tour of the mansion, focusing on all that Stickley furniture. We have both Gustav Stickley pieces and Harvey Ellis with the inlay, as well as Ellen J.G. Stickley pieces. And we have coming up in May, the Talk About Tea with another one of our volunteers, who's the one that has put together our amazing tea on the veranda over the years. We won't be quite ready to do it in person, but we're going to talk about the history of tea and how to host your own tea party. And looking forward to June to learn about elk with Michael Amundsen. And no lectures complete without a pitch to support us. Reardon Mansion Preservation and Programs, you can make donations to Reardon Action Network. And Reardon Action Network is underneath the umbrella of the Northern Arizona Pioneers Historical Society. And you can make donations through the azgives.org page. And when you do get to that page, and I'll put this link in the chat box in a little bit, you can select Reardon Mansion as one of the choices. You can also leave it up to them to decide to help all the different organizations that Northern Arizona Pioneers Historical Society does support. And Arizona Gives Day is right around the corner on April 6th. And Northern Arizona Pioneers Historical Society and Reardon Action Network would love for you to help out by making those donations during the power hours. A $100 gift between 7 and 8 a.m. on April 6th will help them win a bonus prize of $4,000, and $25 gifts between 4 and 5 p.m. on that same April 6th will put them in the running for a bonus of $1,000. And they've got a good record of winning some of these bonuses, so we'd love to help them out with that again. And now I'm going to introduce you all to Herb Stratford. So excited to have you with us today. And I'm really excited about this because I got this random email about a year ago saying, I've got this documentary that's just done, and I want to do a screening at Reardon Mansion and do a fundraiser for you. And of course, then COVID hit, and then, nothing happened with that. So someday, when things get back to normal, we will be able to perhaps do that. So Herb, if you want to introduce yourself, and I will get that trailer ready to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nikki. And nice. Thank you all for being here. My name is Herb Stratford, and I am I'm a lot of things, but right now I'm here because I'm a filmmaker, and Gustav Stickley, American Craftsman, is our first feature documentary. We've done a number of shorter documentaries over the past few years, but this is something very near and dear to our heart. My wife and I collaborated on this film with a small crew, and we actually live in a 1907 Mission Revival house. You can see some period stuff behind me. Nothing is Gustav in the picture, but that's okay. We do have a piece that I'm looking at now across the room. And this was really kind of a 4-year passion project. And those of you who have seen it will see that it's really sort of a love letter to a movement and to a style and to something that we feel really resonates across the last 100 years, and something that is really just as relevant today as it was when it was revolutionary. And so we embarked on a 4-year journey to make this film. And as Nikki mentioned, we thought we were going to launch last March. And then it turned out that COVID had other plans for us. And so we sort of sort of pivoted and waited till this March, and been really pleased by the response we've gotten. We're actually on, I think, 55 different screens right now in about 23 states, all virtually. I think there was one in-person theater up in Michigan that was doing it. But, it's such a fascinating tale. I think that it's one of these great American stories that it is sort of untold on the screen. And certainly anybody who's a Stickley fan knows there's books and books and there's been magazine articles and whatnot, but something so incredibly visual to not have it be captured on film was really sort of kind of surprising to us. And so we were so happy to be able to do this. And it opened up so many fascinating doors once we kind of got further into the movement and started to meet Stickley family members and started to be able to go to places. We traveled to, about 11 different states across the country. This story is largely a northeastern United States story, but there's bungalows everywhere. There's Stickley furniture everywhere, as we all know, from northern Arizona all the way, California, all the way to New York. So, this is also a story that is probably, our film is about 67 minutes, and I think it runs pretty tight. But this could have been much longer. The Stickley story is so rich and so diverse, and we touch on a lot of things that we could have gone into much more detail, and we could have kept filming for years with the things that are happening, but we really decided we needed to kind of, close the chapter on filming and move into editing and get the film out. So yes, so we're excited that it's out there now, and we're excited that we're able to help support the Reardon a little bit in having this link available and to be able to talk today. So let's roll the trailer, because some folks may have seen the film but not the trailer. Who knows?
If it wasn't 100 years old, it wasn't valuable. This is an antique store. We don't carry that junk.
Do you know the name Stickley? If they do know it, they'll say furniture, but there's so much more to it.
There was a mystical, if you will, quality about Gustav Stickley furniture. I mean, he really was showing people that you can transform the quality of your life from the inside of the home out by how you choose to live. This is how I do it.
When you walk into the living room, which is the first space that people get to see and get immersed into Stickley's world, you usually hear a sigh out of people.
In the magazine, Stickley created a gospel for the American arts and crafts movement.
And it rejected traditional values. It was concerned about ecology, children's rights in the workplace, women's rights in the workplace. We take for granted these things. They weren't part of the established workday before the arts and crafts movement kicked in.
Like a lot of people who start working in New York City, he discovered New Jersey.
His vision for Craftsman Farms was that this would be a living laboratory for him to experiment with the back-to-nature lifestyle that the arts and crafts movement was in favor of.
He had this vision and he was able to realize it.
This movement didn't die in the 20s. The principles, they've endured.
When Gustav Stickley died in 1942, he was really long forgotten. There was really no obituary in the New York Times.
All of a sudden, we're elevating this to art. It's happening in Princeton. It's a fine academic institution. Therefore, they must know something.
Prices began to rise. Christie's in New York and then Sotheby's in New York really became major players in the market.
380,000. We can't collect this anymore.
And I didn't know anything about this dresser, except that it didn't work very well. It was one of the worst pieces of furniture I ever had for functionality. One day I came home and was told that it was now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
His life had become greater than merely producing furniture.
If all of us were able to realize this much of our dream, this much, that's amazing to me. I'll take it.
So there you have it. If you haven't seen it, hopefully you'll be compelled to see it. It was, the interesting thing is people asked us how much editing did you have to do and how much footage did you shoot, and we actually shot just over 24 hours of footage over the period of time that we worked on the film. So there's a lot of extra material that hopefully we actually were just talking a couple weeks ago about. Maybe we need to create some little vignettes and push out more of the content that didn't make the final cut, because there were such great stories and such great things to see and hear. You also want to kind of walk this fine line with a film like this. You don't want to alienate folks who know who Stickley was and a little bit about Stickley, but you also want to make it, inviting to people who have either never heard the name or don't know any of the stories. So that was kind of one of the biggest challenges, was to make it approachable yet not, maybe boring to people who already know a little bit of the legacy. And so I don't know if Nikki, if you want to start in one particular vein, or how we want to move forward.
Get myself unmuted. Well, let's see. How did you first get interested in Gustav Stickley?
Sure. So my wife and I, before we got married, we started finding ourselves drawn to the furniture and of the movement, and we started haunting a couple of antique shops, and we kept thinking to ourselves, we got to wait till we get married. We got to wait till we have a house. We can't buy this furniture and kind of lug this stuff around because it is substantial. This is not IKEA stuff. And so we went down the rabbit hole, and a lot of folks have what we call kind of the gateway piece. It's almost like a gateway drug. It just kind of opens up your world. And we actually bought a Limbert rocker. Limbert was another manufacturer of the style. And we bought that at a local antique store. It just really was sort of one of the more affordable things, and it wasn't too big to move around. And that kind of opened the rabbit hole for us. And we started then, subscribing to American Bungalow and Style 1900. And then we, started buying books and, started searching things out. And if we were in Los Angeles, we would go to the Los Angeles dealers and we would look at stuff. And then, we just came home with an L&JG footstool. And all of a sudden, we're starting to create this little, kind of tableau of furniture. And then you start looking, and you're looking at pottery, and you're looking at, textiles, and you start to really dig deep. And then you maybe get a copy of the Craftsman magazine. And it just kind of opened up this whole world to us that was there. And it was just, you needed to go looking. And this is in, probably the mid to late 80s. And so it was actually a time when the explosion of probably the highest dollar values for auction related pieces. So, in the film, you see them talking about Barbara Streisand selling the sideboard that came out of Stickley's house in Syracuse, or buying it for $380,000. And, so we certainly weren't in that world. We were certainly looking at, the small local antique shops in Tucson and finding what we could. And that didn't mean that we didn't see Gustav's, work coming to town. We had a dealer who actually would call us and say, I have a truck coming in from New York, and if you want to come down while we're unloading, you can look at what's coming in. And we would go down and look at things and go, oh, wow, that would be nice to have, but, we can't afford that. So we definitely kind of carried a torch for Stickley for a long time. And we actually toyed with the idea of making a movie a long time ago, but we really weren't in a position to do that. And eventually got, to the place where it made sense and had the skills and the ability to do that. And we're kind of amazed that it hadn't happened yet, because, a good 15, 20 years went by and there was still no movie. So I think a lot of times during the production of the movie, we were sort of pinching ourselves and thinking, can't believe we're getting to do this. And this was there was a number of bucket list things that happened, like going to the National Arts and Crafts Conference in Asheville, North Carolina, that takes place at the Grove Park Inn. And that had been on our bucket list for 20 years. And then to be able to go and, meet Stickley family members and be filming during the conference, and then eventually to debut the film in a sneak peek last February at the conference right before the world changed, was really very rewarding. It was also very terrifying. I'll tell you that was the first audience that saw our film, and it was also the scariest audience that ever saw our film, because you had 900 people in this room who all knew something about Stickley. And it was not just a random audience where some people would know. They all knew. And so I pretty much held my breath for all 67 minutes, waiting to see what response we would get, specifically some of the interviews. And, Richard Wiles, who is very funny and very different from a lot of the kind of stoic interviews that we did, because he's very irreverent about the history. And we were greatly rewarded by the response we got, the family and everybody in that room. I mean, we had lines of people coming up to us afterwards saying, "You did it, congratulations, you stuck the landing and you told the story." And we're so excited, and we can't wait to share it with the rest of the world, which was really gratifying. It was almost like better to get that screening out of the way right away, and then move on to the rest of the world. So.
You were very lucky to be able to show it off at the conference last year, since the conference ended up going virtual this year.
Yeah, Bruce Johnson and the National Arts and Crafts folks, they've done this conference for 30 plus years, and they were actually very supportive from the very beginning. I went out to the conference in 2016 before we started filming, and he took time to speak with me, and then his Arts and Crafts Research Fund actually supported the filming and during the process, because this was a largely, I would say, 80% self-financed project. We did do a couple of crowdsourced campaigns through Indiegogo to raise some money, but the large majority of this was self-funded, and that was kind of another reason why it was a labor of love. You kind of have to have a track record, and we didn't have a track record of feature films to fall back on, and some would say that this was a little bit niche-y in terms of the world. It's a lesser known name. I think that that's unjust, and I hope we've corrected that record a little bit. I think that Stickley is just as important as some of his peers like Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Tiffany, and I think there's some folks that he needs to be recognized for what an amazing legacy he offered the world, and the fact that these concepts that he was espousing, like farm to table, and is back around again, and even the idea of sort of a do-it-yourself idea about an appreciation for the hand of the craftsman and an appreciation for materials. These are all themes that are back again, and so the idea that we need to recognize maybe where they came from before, and then he had some pretty good ideas 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago.
Absolutely. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? You can unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Marilyn, and I tried to put something in the chat, and for some reason, it didn't get there, I guess. I was wondering what caused the breakup between Gustav and LNJG.
So the family dynamic between the brothers was very interesting, and they had a series of engagements where they worked collaboratively, and then they worked in competition. And the very first kind of example of Gustav and his brothers working together was after he got his first commission, coming out of the Grand Rapids furniture exhibition in 1901, I believe. And he basically didn't have the capacity, or I think the attention span, to gear up to meet the furniture order that was placed. So he engaged his brothers, Leopold and John George, to basically be his hands and to create that work. And I think what ended up happening, was everyone started taking notice of this new design movement that Gus was sort of the leader of. And there started to be, I don't want to say knockoffs, but there were certainly other manufacturers, basically copying and being inspired by Gus's work, or even other makers of, from the English arts and crafts movement. So it was sort of this relationship where they were family. And I think they worked together out of necessity, but also they were all kind of, very strong-willed personalities. And so, Gus saw them as competing with him and maybe taking business away from him and maybe, stealing ideas, but then he needed them. And so then they would work together. And, we actually have a piece by another one of his brothers, Charles. So, I mean, there was a lot of competition inside the family, outside the family. And it, I think it ebbed and flowed, but I think it was, they all sort of followed Gus's lead. And, really, he was the one with the Craftsman magazine. He was the one with the vision for Craftsman Farms. He was the one with the 12-story, building in Manhattan. they were like, okay, this is, there's some people buying this stuff, and maybe we can make it a little cheaper. Maybe we can make it a little bit faster. And then there was other folks like, the Roycrofters and Elbert Hubbard, who were also, kind of in the market and in the genre that were capitalizing on this interest. And if you think about it, it's a very short period of time. I mean, really, the American arts and crafts movement is about 10 years of real kind of intense success from a market perspective. And then World War I happens and everything changes. And L&JG, went on to continue to do other lines of furniture beside arts and crafts. And, that eventually was bought by the Audi company. So now you have the Audi Stickley company making a number of different furniture lines. And of course, they're still creating work up in upstate New York. And they have reissued a number of Gus designs and L&JG designs, specifically things with Harvey Ellis's inlay work that's highly collectible. And, so it's almost like, Gus was all about American arts and crafts and really was the standard bearer. And, even though he attempted to do other things, his greatest success was definitely in that, where other makers like his brothers, ended up doing things, outside of that and did different lines of furniture and continued to adapt to the market. I think he was of a singular mind, and I think maybe that's one of the differences, where they were kind of like, we're furniture makers, and whatever is successful, we're gonna keep doing that.
Thank you. An obvious question in the chat is, have you visited Reardon Mansion?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I have not. So thanks for shaming me. We're down here in Tucson, so we're not that we're, because it's sort of a silly thing to say since we went to upstate New York frequently, but we have not. And I kept thinking to myself, well, we are going to, and the best way to come to the Reardon Mansion is to come with the film and to do an event there with the film and to be very immersive. We have one property down here in Tucson that is part of the Tucson Museum of Art campus, and they have. It's a house as well. It's much smaller than the Reardon, but there is some Stickley furniture there as well. So it's always interesting to me that Arizona, you think about, this very northeastern kind of American style and how it has permeated literally every state in the nation. But we know very clearly that Stickley visited California. We know that he actually, one of his plans for Craftsman Farms was to be in Palm Springs. He actually went and visited Palm Springs, which is really sort of interesting when you think of Palm Springs as became the mid-century modern sort of capital, and it could have had a very different life if that's where Stickley had chosen to do things. But Gustav did visit Southern California. He went specifically to meet with Green and Green. So it's interesting how even in that smaller world, all these things connect. And I always like to point out to people when we do chats like this that, there's bungalows probably in every state of the nation. And that's a Gus legacy. And that's something that, his name isn't on all those bungalows, and he certainly didn't design all those bungalows, but it was the ideas behind those bungalows and the creation of those living spaces that were a central tenet to the American arts and crafts movement. And so that's a pretty cool legacy that goes everywhere. So yes, I am ashamed that I have not been, but I've had a good excuse for the last year because it's been closed. So I couldn't come if I wanted to. Nikki might have let me in. I don't know. Maybe.
We will have to get you in here. We'll keep you posted. I did have a question that's more to me because I know the collections here. Do we have correspondence with the Reardons and Stickley? And yes, we do. We have some letters where Michael Reardon is writing to United Crafts for samples and layout designs and recommendations for furniture while the house is under construction. Unfortunately, we also have a letter following up where Michael complains about their prices. Michael was good at that. And it does appear that all the Stickley furniture they did purchase, they actually purchased through Marshall Fields and not through United Crafts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings up a really interesting point too that I've had asked in the past was, the idea that who was this furniture for? And the idea that one of the central tenets was, addressing a need for furniture for the emerging working class and for, kind of as part of this whole lifestyle and being sort of an early lifestyle entrepreneur. But, the idea that this was a reaction to cheaply made factory furniture that was proliferating and trying to acknowledge the hand of the craftsman and, again, tipping back towards the English arts and crafts movement, where that was so important, that there was the idea of learning how to make things and making them with your own hands and appreciation for materials. So this furniture, the idea that in theory it was, ideally for the common man, and it was not for kings and queens, or it was not for, a very high dollar value. But by the time it got done, the cost of manufacture and the materials, it started to price itself above what that threshold might have been for, as you're just mentioning, it might have been like, oh, wow, well, this stuff's beautiful, but, if I've got to buy 9 of these things, that gets a little bit expensive if I'm doing some sort of a custom thing. And, other people like the Roycrofters, Elbert Hubbard, they actually specialized more in those commissions and less in a direct-to-consumer market. So, like, when you look at the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina, that was furnished by the Roycrofters. That was, a commercial job. We want to buy 45 beds and, 60 nightstands and, 30 rockers. And, that kind of a manufacturing was very different than what Stickley was doing. So it's always interesting to see the correspondence, because so much of that material was lost when Stickley went into bankruptcy, and so much of it went into a landfill probably. And we were able to see some of the stuff that exists at Craftsman Farms. There was like petty cash vouchers and some really interesting things that were really cool. And then also we had some letters that we read, and saw a little bit of in the film from Stickley to his daughters later in his life. But he was not a diary keeper. He was not a very hands-on kind of, oversharing kind of person. So you have to kind of recreate some of that stuff from other sources. And it's always interesting to see that record, of how much.
Well, those letters are at NAU Special Collections Library, so anybody can go and look at them. Of course, we have photocopies of them here so that we can look at them more often. But when you do make it, we can show that to you.
Absolutely.
So you've been asked, could you please share more information about Stickley's youth and upbringing?
Sure. So, it's a little bit sketchy, again, because there's no real diaries or there's no real, anecdotal first-person accounts. We did interview Ben Wiles, who you see in the film, who was his last living grandson, who passed since we filmed, but we interviewed him at age 99, which was a real treat. He lived in the house on Columbus Avenue in Syracuse with Gus at the end of Gus's life when he was living in the attic. Before he passed at 42. So a lot of the information is somewhat anecdotal that's been handed down through the family. But, basically he was born in Wisconsin. One of, I think it was 8 children. His father was a stonemason. And it was sort of itinerant. His father was in and out of the family's life. His mother moved, him and the rest of the family to New York, where he apprenticed after his 8th grade. It's kind of where education stopped at that point for a lot of people. And he apprenticed at an uncle's chair factory, and that's really where I think he found the appreciation for working with his hands. And we hear stories. If you look at the Craftsman magazine, you see some articles specifically when he starts talking about Craftsman Farms about the idea of the importance of that and the fact that he hated working as a stonemason's assistant. He didn't like that rough work. He liked the fine work, and he was so drawn to wood as a material as opposed to stone. And he then surrounded himself with people who, were really experts in the field and other designers and, people like Irene Sargent, who was a great writer, wrote the first 2 issues of the Craftsman. So he acknowledged, kind of his limits of his education and his experience as a young boy. But, I think this is sort of the classic, tale of first-generation immigrants where, they was very hard scrabble. And, there was a certain amount of education. But then if you were lucky, you were apprenticed and hopefully you found something you were good at. But then he really took that to the next level and found, all these influences in this moment in time, and he kind of coalesced it into a package. But yeah, it's very little is known about that life. There's not, family photographs. There's not diaries. It was really, what could we get that had been handed down through the generations as family lore, which we all know is somewhat colored by the teller. But it seemed like it was a pretty stereotypical tale of someone who had been born at that time.
I think it was a lot of fun to hear from some of the family members when you did this talk at the Arts and Crafts Conference. There was quite a few great grandchildren in the group, and it was a lot of fun to hear their surprise as they learned the importance of Gustav in the history.
Yeah, it was really quite sweet. Tim and Cindy McGinn. Cindy's a great granddaughter, and they live in Boston, and we interview them, and you see them in the film, and she has these great stories about first time she saw a picture of Gus on the wall in an antique store, and she's like, "Why is my great grandfather's picture on the wall over here?" And the family knew about the history of Gus as a furniture maker, but really until Robert Judson Clark and the Forgotten Rebel and kind of the rediscovery of Stickley in the late 60s, it was, it was a story, and I mean, it was like grandpa likes to, great grandpa did finishes, I mean, he was just like a furniture maker. There was no idea that it was this kind of, world altering kind of, icon who was really, before his time. And it's sort of interesting that they sort of held that close, and then it was a little bit weird to share that information out, but they were so open and so willing to share stuff. I think that they felt like, yeah, it's time to get the story out and to be able to tell this. And I can't imagine doing the film without their support. Not that they had any kind of editorial oversight, but I mean, for them to open up their houses and to share letters and the sisters would come over and pull out this, sheaf of letters, and they'd let us go through them, and then to photograph and be able to see the furniture that the piano that's been in the family for 100 years. I mean, that's really kind of cool, and it's nice that it's in the family's possession. I mean, I think eventually it'll be probably at Craftsman Farms, but the idea that it had value and it was preserved and it was something that they were proud of, and now they were sharing that with the world, was really nice.
Absolutely. About how many hours of footage did you end up with?
So yeah, it was about 24 to 25 hours. And the thing that's interesting about a documentary is, unlike a narrative feature where, maybe if you're a crazy director and you say, I want to do 27 takes of the same scene, this was actually, there's not a lot of duplication. This is all, footage that, maybe it's B-roll of, Craftsman Farms and different rooms and different angles of fireplace hoods or, what have you, that we were editing down. But it wasn't like there was 10 hours of footage, but we had it from 3 different angles. It wasn't something like that. So it was sort of an exercise in editing that our editor, Jana French, was really great. She came in, and I'm a strong believer that as a director, you really probably shouldn't edit your own film, because in your mind, you have a certain vision and you shot it that way. And it's better to have somebody else come in and say, okay, well, I'm not immersed in it. I didn't spend, 20 years learning this story. I have to assemble this in a way that it works. And so it was a real collaboration where we watched all of the footage together, and I brought her basically up to speed on Stickley. And so I would sit there constantly, stop the film and say, okay, this is about this, or this is about that, or this is who that person is, and really gave her an education of the editor, an education in the movement and in who Stickley was. And then she went away and she would start to assemble things, and then we would go back and forth, and she'd show me something and I'd say, okay, well, no, we want more of this or less of that, or let's put this in front of that or whatever. And, it was 9 months, honestly, of going back and forth before, we ended up to a point where it was like, yep, this is where we feel good. Or we needed, one more interview here, or we could use a couple more visuals here. And so that was really, really a great process. And I think that's the thing that people maybe don't understand. It's not like you shoot it and then you go develop it and the film's done. I mean, that's a whole nother step of editing to get to the finished project.
So do you think now would be a good time to show that behind the scenes?
Yes, let's do that. So we have a little, just to tee that up, we have a little behind the scenes clip that we are packaged that we put together that just shows a little bit of us filming that we're sharing with a few people, and you guys are able to do it.
Okay, so David, why don't you tell us a little bit about the first piece that you bought? What is that?
This is a Craftsman serving table. It is the first piece of Stickley furniture that I bought. I bought it in 1973. I forget exactly why this was, but I was visiting the home of a Tiffany dealer, and this was in her dining room. And I knew what it was, and I also could tell even at that point that this was its original finish. It had never been refinished. So I love the idea that it was a piece of Gustav Stickley furniture, that it has its original finish, and I really wanted to buy it. It was not for sale. It was something that the dealer had no interest in selling. And after we went back and forth talking about it a bit, she said to me, you know, I have a little girl and she needs a desk. So I'm going to cut 6 inches off the bottom of the legs and it'll be a perfect size desk for her. I sort of freaked out, you know, when she said that. And so I spent a lot of time going back and forth. And it was not enough money so that it was a significant thing to her one way or the other. And she didn't particularly want to sell it, but somehow I convinced her to sell it to me. And so I've kept it ever since.
About 75, 76. And Jordan Gallery was the place that really put arts and crafts on the map by showing pieces of Ruby and Newcomb and Rookwood and Stickley on pedestals with pinpoint lighting, really elevating the material in the eyes of potential collectors. They were buying ads in expensive magazines like the magazine Antiques. First time a piece of Stickley in the magazine Antiques, unheard of. I think it's also important to bear in mind that at this point in time, if it wasn't 100 years old, it wasn't valuable. The idea that an antique had to be 100 years old. And so in 1975, arts and crafts was 60 years old, 70 years old at most. And the established antique buyers turned their noses up at it.
Thank you. Much better. This is all funded by $100 donations.
The last piece that he ever designed put together. He gave it to me when I was married. There were only 2 such chairs. But we talked quite freely about how we were going to get that plant going. And that was just one. That was just pre-war, so nothing happened.
Oh, it's geez. I'll do another. Let's go some slow-mo mode here. No, I'll do another approach in slow-mo. Actually, we could do a nice reveal. That'd be cool.
Deck out in front of the house. Because one of the things that they did that was, I think, not very bright was that you would sit in front of the house and they planted bushes. And so I would drive 300 miles to get here on the weekend. And I would sit down at the picnic tables and not be able to see the lake because the damn bushes were too high. So you can't get rid of the bushes because they're beautiful and that no one planted that. So we had to build just a modestly elevated deck over here
in the corner, so you can see the light. This probably took 10 years of internal family battles as to what Gus would think about the deck. There were a lot of opinions. And I remember, so finally, I had broken through all the internal family bureaucracy and I'm going to go build the deck. Well, the day I'm going to build the deck, literally the night before, my uncle, Peter, who was one of Gus's grandchildren, dies. Okay, so I'm supposed to build the deck with my cousin. And Peter dies, which messed up the whole schedule. You know, so Carl comes over, we're going to build the deck. I'm never going to build the deck. We're going to build the deck and go to the funeral. That's what we're going to do. So we built the deck, we went to the funeral, and at the funeral are a lot of the children of Barbara and Ben. Gus's, I guess, I can't get this right. So it's Gus's grandchildren, right? So, and so this was a big test of whether or not the deck was going to meet with sort of larger family approval, which is sort of the implied Gus approval. It's as close as we could get. Very old people, see if they like it. So we come back from the service, and all the older people are sort of hobbling down to the front of the house, and they all just went right up onto the deck as though they'd been there and was built by Gus himself. It was just perfect. They all just sat there. That was the invitation of the deck. We may ultimately tear it down and put in a Stickley appropriate structure.
It makes me smile. There's Richard is you know, has such a different perspective on everything, and being able to film at the pump house was really kind of an unexpected treat. We were up in Syracuse, and you know, one thing just led to another, and it was like, oh, would you like to come up to shoot at the pump house? And can we? And I was like, sure, let me call. And then, you know, then we kind of walked up, we're kind of sheepishly walking up, and we were a very small crew. There was about, you know, 3 or 4 of us, and they opened their house to us. We were there for, you know, 4 or 5 hours, and, you know, flying our drone over the lake, and we luckily got a perfect day. And it was just really great to be able to get exposure to so many assets and facets of Gus's life. And he did spend a lot of time up there. So it was really great.
Herb, this is Eric. It kind of struck me as odd that when he went bankrupt, it's like he pulled himself into a hole and vanished. You know, it's not like he tried to restart anything or anything. He just kind of vanished from the scene. I just thought that was strange.
I think in a way, that was a function of you know, the times, you know, everybody, you know, we were entering into, it was a couple of years before we actually, you know, the United States actually got into World War I. But I think it was such a resounding kind of failure that he ended up, you know, going through. I think, you know, he literally and figuratively bet the farm. You know, he had overextended himself. He was in too many gigs. I mean, honestly, the New York department store, I think they told me at one point that it was like about $1 million a year in rent or something, which in 1913 was a hell of a lot of money. So it was, you know, I think it was such a resounding collapse that I think he probably went to lick his wounds, and he had worked so hard that then, you know, basically Ida, his wife, ended up having essentially a nervous breakdown and, you know, eventually passes before him. So I think it was just such the world just smacked Gus so hard, and he did sort of try and dip his toe into the water with, you know, with different finishes and with this kind of toy company that he started to try and do. But it's almost like the wind had just been taken out of his sails, you know, and it was just, but you're right. I mean, somebody who is so spectacularly successful, you would think that drive would have propelled him, but I just think he got rope-a-doped so many times that it was just over, you know, and sort of sad that he didn't live to see his vision kind of fully appreciated. And, you know, he was working so hard that he didn't appreciate it the first time, and he, you know, died in obscurity. So it's nice that, you know, that we're able to tell this story. And that's what I think is one of the great benefits of this, is that we get to help tell this story. What a great gift that is, that we're now, helping raise awareness of something that, is unjustly forgotten.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So another question is, what is your absolute favorite piece?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's probably, it would be something that Ellis did. I don't know if it would necessarily be, a specific piece. Like, I love all of Ellis's design work for Gus. So, probably a Harvey Ellis designed a desk, or maybe even an Ellis chair. They're just to me, they're just the pinnacle of that design. And I think it's the dark finish. It's the inlay. It's still the really clean linear forms that I just think it's just the pinnacle of that. And it's just such an interesting tale that it was such a short period of time that Ellis worked with Gustav that it's just, those pieces to me are they're just the most beautiful thing. And I think if we had something like that, it would have to have a little rope and stanchions around it because I wouldn't want anybody to touch it or sit on it. So I kind of feel like even if I could have one, I would be scared to have one because they're to me, they're art. It's not even furniture, it's art. And I think that's the compliment that you can pay. Certainly they're functional, and you could sit in them, but I would be terrified that I would break something. So.
Do we have any other questions?
This is Marilyn again.
Okay.
Yeah, Marilyn again. I'm going to encourage you to come to Reardon and see 5 pieces of Ellis furniture. And probably the rarest is the record cabinet. It's not a music cabinet. It's a record cabinet. Yep. No, you can't touch, but you can get close, very, very close.
I will take you up on that.
Thank you so much. They're very good.
Thank you. I will definitely take you up on that. Yeah, pretty much anything Ellis did is just gorgeous, and I'm afraid to touch it. It's funny. When we were at Tim and Cindy's house in Boston, one of Gus's great granddaughters, they would say to us, "Oh, well, just move whatever you want if it's not right in the shot," and we would be like, "We're not touching that. We are not picking that up. You may live with that, but I am not going to touch that because if something happens, I can't replace it." And so very respectful of those rules. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, a good one to wrap up with is what's next for you?
It's interesting. We're sort of in pre-production on a project about another furniture maker. My wife said, "Do we have to do another furniture person right away?" But there is a furniture maker by the name of Thomas Molesworth, and if anybody's interested, look him up. It's a very different thing. He was a Cody, Wyoming furniture designer in the 30s. I grew up around some of his furniture because my family had some property in Wyoming. We used to go out every summer, and so I lived with this furniture. And there've been a few kind of things about Molesworth. He's even more niche-y than Stickley, but his stuff goes for sale at Sotheby's and Christie's for just astronomical because it's just a very unique style. It's kind of a cowboy kitsch kind of style. So anyway, we're in pre-production on a film about that because there's this kind of family history with this furniture that I grew up with. And so, but another interesting character who was deeply influenced by Stickley, and we know that because he had Stickley books. He talked about Stickley being an influence. So that's one of the interesting legacies is, there's all these designers who people don't even know they were influenced by Stickley because Stickley was that influential. So working on that and then a couple other little things, but nothing that probably is in the Reardon, but we're gonna definitely try and get up and do a screening or something maybe in the fall with you all. And I look forward to meeting anybody that's on the call that might be there.
Thank you so much.